Hey guys, it's Mr. Hunter here. I have our book, Who Was Frederick Douglass? Today we're going to dive into chapter 6, which is called The North Star. You should have your book. You should be on page 67, and let's get ready to dive in, all right? Now, the idea of being captured haunted Frederick. By law, he still belonged to the Alps. After making sure that the money from his book sales would go directly to Anna, Frederick left the household in her capable hands and fled to England. There, and in Ireland and Scotland, he gave speeches in nearly all the large cities and towns, asking for help ending American slavery. Already famous in America, Frederick became well known in Europe as well. Frederick was amazed to find that in England, blacks were treated the same as whites. Whether on a train or in a restaurant, hotel, or church, he was welcome without concern for his color. No one insulted him or threw him out, as they often did in America. And you should turn the page. He felt refreshed and for the first time, truly free. It was tempting to move his family overseas, but Frederick felt he must go home. How else could he help the millions still enslaved? Then, a group of his English friends did something remarkable. They raised money to buy Frederick's freedom from the Alls, and the Alls agreed. In exchange for 150 British pounds, or about $700, Hugh Auld signed papers freeing Frederick forever. Freedom! Now Frederick could devote himself fully to his life's work of ending slavery. After 21 months abroad, Frederick returned to America with plans of starting his own anti-slavery newspaper. He moved his family to Rochester, New York, where there was a strong abolitionist community. And you see there, Frederick was in the restaurants and he didn't get treated wrong. There wasn't a black section or a white section. He was welcomed. And that had to be new to him. That had to be different. Very weird for somebody to be discriminated against and then to be shown so much love and peace and treated like he was normal. And then you see over here, you see where Rochester is and the rest of New York. And then you see New Jersey and Pennsylvania. All right, let's turn the page. Frederick published the first issue of his paper, The North Star, all right, in 1847. The paper, named after the star that guided runaway slaves to freedom, published accounts of escaped slaves and news about successful free blacks. It was something that would encourage others. It printed stories and poems by black writers. It spoke out against the poor treatment of blacks in the North. The North Star made Frederick a true leader of his people. And in 1851, he would rename the publication the Frederick Douglass Paper. In his newspaper and in his talks, Frederick also spoke up for women's rights. Women could not vote. In most states, they could not own property. The few jobs open to them did not pay well, and women were expected to marry, keep the house, and raise children while their husbands handled outside affairs. So that's not really fair, right? They were not treated equally. But now we're so thankful that things have changed. And a lot of them changed because of people like Frederick standing up for the women. In 1848, America's first women's rights convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York. Frederick attended the event and supported it in the North Star. So not only did Frederick go to the event that was supporting for women, he wrote about it in his publication, which was called the North Star. All right, let's turn the page. Let's look at this. It says a mighty team, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were courageous, determined reformers who worked for equal rights for women. They were also active in the abolitionist movement. Anthony and Stanton met and began working together in 1851. And in 1869, they formed the National Woman Suffrage Association, which focused on women's rights to vote. Stanton drafted a voting rights amendment to the Constitution that was first introduced in 1878. Unfortunately, the amendment was not accepted until 1920, by which time both women had died. So even though their initial plans didn't work at first, because they started it, it was eventually passed. And what they did helped so many other women after them. So even though you may be doing something right now, you may not see the results now, but in the future, you may see the results. You don't know who you're helping. And that's what happened with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton. Let's keep reading now on page 73. Frederick's work as an abolitionist did not stop with his newspaper or speeches. His house in Rochester was also a stop or a station on the Underground Railroad. You guys remember the Underground Railroad, right? With Harriet Tubman, yeah, okay. This railroad had no tracks or trains. Instead, it was a network of people and houses that helped slaves escape from the South. As conductors on this railroad, Frederick and Anna provided food and shelter to runaways before seeing them off on the last leg of their journey to freedom in Canada. You see that there? Frederick helped so many people. He was even one of the stops on the Underground Railroad. All right, let's look. Oh, here we go. Remember Harriet Tubman? We're going to learn a little bit more about her. Harriet Tubman was born a slave in Maryland around 1820. As a young woman, she escaped slavery on the Underground Railroad. She then risked her own freedom to return to the South again and again, helping more than 300 slaves, including members of her own family, reach freedom in the North. As the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad, Harriet was proud to say, "I never ran my train off the track and I never lost a passenger." So in all the trips that she made back and forth to the South to get people who were slaves back to freedom, she never had one person get caught. She never had one person die, and she never stopped until she was able to get as many people as she could. That is really called perseverance and determination, and we cannot thank Harriet enough for doing that for our people. All right, let's keep reading. Page 75. Frederick's work on the Underground Railroad brought him unspeakable joy, but helping runaway slaves was risky. He and Anna could be fined up to $1,000 and sent to jail. And at that time, $1,000 was worth a lot of money. Frederick and others began to worry that peaceful means were not enough to achieve their goals. One white man who wanted to use force to end slavery was Frederick's friend and fellow abolitionist John Brown. In 1859, Brown asked Frederick to join him in a raid to steal government weapons at the Weapons to Slave, at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. Brown, Brown planned to give the weapons to slaves so they could fight against their masters. Brown hoped that a mass rebellion of slaves would end slavery once and for all. Frederick was sure the plan would fail. He told Brown that he would not be a part of it. So there were some people who didn't want to do what Frederick was doing, which was peaceful. He wanted to go around and try to stop slavery one way, but then there were some slaves who wanted to fight, and they wanted to kill the white masters or anybody who was a slave owner. And Frederick didn't believe in that plan. So did he support it? No. So even though some people may want to do a plan, do you have to agree with them? You have to go with what's in your heart. You have to choose wisely and make decisions that will benefit you. You can't always follow the crowd. All right. Let's look at the next pages. All right. 76 and 77. So Brown, the man who wanted to fight, he secured the weapons from an arsenal in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. But about half of his men were killed, and he and some of the others were captured by U.S. soldiers the next day. Officials found letters from Frederick in John's carpetbag. Frederick had nothing to do with the raid. However, he knew no one would believe this. With government officials on his tail, Frederick fled to Canada. So even though he didn't help the man Brown, John Brown, with the fighting, they found some of the letters where he was talking to him. And if the police were to catch Frederick, they would put him in just as much trouble as John Brown was. So Frederick, he left from Baltimore, he went to New York, and then he went from New York, he went to Massachusetts, and now guess what? He has to leave again. And where did he go? He went to Canada. Let's look at this last page here. From Canada, Frederick left for England, only to return 6 months later when word came that his youngest daughter, Annie, had died. Deeply saddened, Frederick took the first steamer home. No matter what danger awaited him, back in America, he found that no matter what danger awaited him. Back in America, he found that to a growing number of people, Brown had become a hero. The United States was now focused on the presidential election of 1860. Frederick supported Republican Abraham Lincoln, the only candidate who opposed the spread of slavery. Although Frederick did not agree with everything Lincoln stood for, he threw himself into campaigning for him. So that's really big. Now Frederick Douglass, not only was he a slave, he taught others to read, he was helping people escape, he was teaching and talking about ending slavery, and now we found out Frederick is about to go into politics in the government. Doesn't it seem like Frederick did a whole lot? It's amazing what he did, but guess what? We're still not done learning. We're going to look back in the next chapter, at chapter 7, the war between the states. All right, enjoy.